celebrate the third anniversary of the Aragala, perhaps we should take a moment to reflect on the freedoms that we now have, but more importantly, to think about how we should be exercising those freedoms in order to optimize whatever those freedoms may be. Good evening and welcome to Face to Face for the Newsfirst team. I'm Niresh Eliathambi. My guest tonight is a person who has consistently pushed the boundaries of freedom in this country. I'm speaking about Dr. Paikiasothy Saravanamuttu, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives, CPA. Good evening, Dr. Sara. Welcome back to the program.
Good evening.
Right. So here we are, third anniversary of the Aragala. It seems like it was yesterday, and it seems like it was a lifetime ago as well. That's rather peculiar to me. And I mean, I've been in this business for 35 years. You've been fighting the good fight for the freedoms in this country for much longer. How do you look back on the Aragala and where we are now?
I think, in terms of the legacy of the Aragala, I think it was this whole sense of that we needed a new political culture and that we could get greater transparency into our government and governance and focus on accountability. The arguments at the Aragala, came out with regard to system change, though, on the other hand, were not as coherent. Neither was there a kind of uniform consensus as to what that entailed, and that was largely because the Aragala was made up of various different political actors. So, but I think the main thing is that it broke through and sort of said that, look, the existing political establishment was decrepit and it did not engage in transparency. It didn't seem to be at all interested in accountability, and that needed to be broken. And we needed to have a new government or a new political culture which emphasized the questions of transparency and accountability.
Now, Dr. Sara, on that particular Aragala day, we saw well over 1 million people on Galface Green. No one really knows how many. They were spilling over Galface Green onto all the side streets everywhere. I mean, the camera footage which we've seen afresh in the last few days on social media remind us about the power of the people that so many came together, and most of those people were, of course, from the Western Province. I think there were some who came from Gaul and so on. But such an enormous number. When you see that footage, how do you feel? Because I felt proud and nostalgic as well that Sri Lankans. This was the one shining moment, I think.
No, absolutely, absolutely. The Aragala presented to us a picture of what Sri Lanka should be insofar as people from different classes, from different ethnicities, different religions, and from all parts of the country joined in that spontaneous outburst of demonstration against the lack of accountability and transparency and all of that in government. Yes, I mean, in that sense, it was an absolutely high point as far as our contemporary history is concerned. But very soon after the succeeding government came into power, and they talked about the burning of houses and all of that, and put to us that spectre that perhaps there is a frontline socialist party or whoever that was going to bring us back to the dark days of 88, 89, then people started, in effect, deserting the Aragala because, it was the middle class that came out quite surprisingly. And I think they very soon went back home And then when things got tough for them, economically, etc., they start looking for visas and looking for ways of getting out of the country. So it was a moment, if you like, and that moment enabled the JVP, NPP to capitalize on it and present themselves as the one political actor who had never run government before and therefore was committed to transparency and accountability. Now, the question here is that the JVP were particularly successful in the campaigns that followed, but as someone said, they campaigned in poetry and now they're trying to run the government with prose, and they're getting stuck in that sense. I mean, so it's very different in terms of perspective, apparently, from campaigning for office and then being in office. And so I guess we're now coming up to what, 9 months of the new government.
I think 2.5 months more to go for President AKD to celebrate his
first year in office.
Yes.
So, is this enough time that we have given them? Because people have said, look, they're a new government, they have never had the experience of running government and all of that. They have to learn on the job. Is this going to be enough time as far as the public is concerned to give to the JVP, NPP to learn on the job and now start doing the job? This is the public perception, is that there isn't, apart from the highly commendable, and they have to be complimented on what they're doing with regard to corruption, catching people, getting them to make statements, all of that kind of thing. However, there could come a time where the mass of the people sort of think, look, this is somewhat of a distraction because our daily needs in terms of the cost of living and all of that is not being alleviated. So whilst this is good in itself, it will come to be seen as a distraction from the main questions of where does growth come from? Where do we take this country? Be in 27, 28? Are we going to have enough money to pay back our debt? And remember, 27, 28 is when the IMF deal will come to a conclusion, as it were. But then 29 is presidential and general election year.
Absolutely.
So a lot of political factors could come into play then, and those political factors could well disrupt whatever economic stability that we have achieved.
Now, this excuse of we're new to government and we have had to deal with the ghosts of the past amongst the civil servants and so on, we heard that a lot in the first few months from members of the NPP. 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, but I hear less of it now because it doesn't quite wash. I mean, it's now 9 months, or if you say with the cabinet is 8 months old, and as I said, in September it's 1 year. So at that point they can't really say it's new. Of course, there's only so much you can do even in 1 year. I mean, it's not 3 or 4 or 5 years. But at the same time, I get this feeling that now almost 1 year has gone by. Very soon we'll look back and say, oh, it's 2 years, it's 3 years. So time is ticking.
Yeah, I mean, look, when the JVP NPP government came into office, the social contract is in pieces. You have to build practically on all fronts. Okay, so there was a question of what do you prioritize, what do you give particular emphasis to. Now, what has happened is that you have to be able to tell the truth to those people who voted for you. And when you talk about the public service, for example, I would imagine that 80 to 90% of the public service voted for the JVP NPP. However, are they telling them that these levels of public service are sustainable or not? So they have to turn around and talk to their own constituency. And this is the issue, in that I think the communication by the government of what they're doing, what challenges they're facing. Now and again you hear ministers saying that the public service is not completely aligned with our policies and that's holding us back. But they are the government. They need to read the riot act, if you like, to the public service. Also, you need to start thinking about what is required to meet the challenges of the future. You can't just do this on an ad hoc basis. I don't think that's going to work.
But this lack of communication is troubling, isn't it? Because we don't see, we see a lot of NPPers talking about the anti-corruption side, but we don't see much about the cost of living, job creation, investment, FDI. We don't see that side being talked about very much, and that in itself is a certain lack of transparency, isn't it?
It's a certain lack of transparency also. So they have to learn on the job because they have not been running a government before. But I think the issue here is that they're trying to do it also with people who don't necessarily have a decent idea of what the problem is and how to engage with it. So it's a combination of, look, yes, we don't know what to do, but we are going to learn about it in the next couple of months or whatever it is. And the other part is that we don't want to go and talk to people who might be able to give us information or analysis or whatever, who were part of the old establishment, because we do not want to admit that error. So, it's a part of, there is a naivety, and then there's also an arrogance as well of, look, we've got this and we can do it, kind of thing. I think what the JVP NPP government needs to clarify in its own minds and amongst its supporters is that now they are government and they have to govern. It's not just a question of catching people and taking them to the CID and all of that, which is good and needs to be done, but it's also something more than that that has to be looked at in terms of the long-term policies.
Also, as you said, catching people and these former ministers and so on and putting them behind bars, that, yes, it's absolutely vital, but it's dealing with the past, isn't it?
That's the point.
More or less. I mean, there are people who are being arrested by the Bribery Commission for taking bribes.
It's all
here
entirely
and now,
reactive.
but
Yes.
when you say former minister so and so was arrested, well, that's nice. We knew he was a crook, and it's nice he's behind bars. But how does that affect the price of rice and sugar and so on? So people want a government which will deal with the current issues as it is doing with the past.
Yes, absolutely. They are reacting to things. They're trying to rectify what happened in the past without laying necessarily the groundwork for the future. And that's going to be an issue. I don't think it's an issue as yet, in that I think the government has still a fair amount of support for its anti-corruption drive and all of that, and people are very happy that, yes, this represents the new political culture. But beyond that, I think there's going to come a point at which people are then going to ask, so now where do we go from here? Where are they taking us from here? We know we can't do it in a hurry, but are we on the right track? That's the question.
Now, on the economic front, jobs are what people need. I mean, every year we have about 300,000 or more young people who join the workforce. And so you ideally need a very large number of jobs to be created. Of course, there are people who retire, there are people who migrate, so you don't have to create 300,000, but perhaps it's 200,000. And that job creation only comes through large doses of foreign direct investment. Factories, basically, doesn't mean that they need to be in the apparel sector, perhaps something more in the IT sector or something like that. But in the end, you need that FDI, and there doesn't seem to be a huge plan. Again, It may be that it's a lack of communication. Maybe there is a plan.
The government and the opposition got into a bit of a back and forth with regard to the amount of FDI that we have got so far, but we do know that the amount is woefully inadequate in terms of our needs to move forward. Now, we don't know what the Trump tariff is going to be as yet, but if it is the dire kind of scenario is that you might have about 50,000 people being put out of work. You know,
we certainly hope not.
We certainly hope not, but that might well be the case. So now the issue here is the government talking to its constituency and telling them that, look, we can't be providing you jobs all the time. It's unsustainable. We can't have 1.4 million people in the public service, right? So we need to retrain you, give you skills, you know, so that you can go out then and compete for that. Look, I mean, already the government is saying is that, what, 1.4 million, we don't have the skills that we require, so we're going to get another 30,000. This is absurd, you know. So we need to have a skilled workforce. If we're moving into digitalization and we're moving into an era of AI and all of that, we need to have a properly skilled workforce to be able to keep this country going, as it were, make development sustainable and not a millstone around the government's neck where it has to be paying X amount of recurrent costs on salaries and pay and pension kind of thing. So, you know, for that, we have the senior advisor with regard to the digital economy and all of that. We need to know what progress has been made or is being made with regard to this digitalization and what the consequences would be for the rest of the economy. Because, you know, development anywhere has winners or losers in the short term. In the long term, hopefully everything evens out and we are fine. But there are winners and losers in the short term. And so people have to be made aware of it. And that legitimacy that comes from consultation and communication with the people is tremendously important for the work that this government has, as I said, in rebuilding a social contract.
You spoke of digitalization, which we believe is happening. You see on the GovPay platform and so on, there are more and more apps coming online and so on. But my concern here is that the 1.4 million government employees that you spoke of, are they being given the skills to work with these apps, or is it going to be simply a duplication where they're still hanging on to the old files and that system?
This is the thing, is that one needs to talk to them and bring them on board. If they're not brought on board, then we have within the heart of government those who are dragging their feet and effectively sabotaging. You know, so you really have to have that strategy of effective communication where everyone is on the same boat as you are and committed to the kind of development program that you have designed.
But that would require a fairly massive training program to upskill all these people.
Yeah, no, sure, absolutely. But have we begun that? That's the question.
That's a very good question.
You know, so we need to at least, I mean, you know, we don't expect results overnight. It's going to take time. But what we can expect is to see that, look, yes, we are being put on the trajectory that will take us there in 5 years or 10 years or whatever the number of years it's going to be. We need to have that sense of, you know, yes, we are moving beyond the situation that we had in 2022.
And also this upskilling, this retraining, we need to see a time plan for this. 6 months from now, we're going to have, 300,000 of these people.
No, this is the thing, is that we need a proper plan of action. A proper plan of action with deadlines, with KPIs, key performance indicators. We need all of that. But I don't see it Now, the government may well turn around and say, look, we have all of these things. But then I say to them, look, having all of them, but not letting them out to the general public and to the people at large is problematic. Because at the end of the day, politics is as much about perception.
Absolutely.
If people feel that you are moving, if they sort of see you moving in that direction, then you're okay.
But if they just see you having closed door meetings and you come out, and you don't
exactly.
say what's going on, it doesn't really work.
Right. I mean, you take, for example, leave the economy aside. You take, for example, the pledges that we made, and we've talked about this before, Prevention of Terrorism Act, Online Security Act, reforming the Office of the Attorney General. You just take those three things. Then when you talk about the litigation and all of that, the emblematic cases. Now, what is the government doing with regard to Germany? Is it providing enough resources? Is it providing enough security? Has anyone from the government ever been to Germany?
Well, these are very good questions, and we will delve into these a little bit further, or a lot further. But first we need to take a short commercial break. I am in conversation with Dr. Paikiasothy Saravanamuttu, and we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Face to Face. I am in conversation with Dr. Paikiasothy Saravanamuttu. Now, Dr. Sara, in terms of law reform, which was a huge deal before the elections, so many bad laws, so many obsolete laws, and there was some kind of blueprint. The PTA, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, was supposed to go out, but it's still there. Of course, the government has said they're appointing a committee to look into replacing it with something else, and the PTA itself will go out, but we haven't seen that progress yet. And as I said, it's been 7 months, 8 months, 9 months now, and the PTA, worryingly, continues to be used. I think even last week somebody was arrested under the PTA. That person, perhaps you may say, deserves to be locked up, but then it's the process and it's the law, the draconian law which is being used, which is the concern.
I think governments keep using laws like the PTA more as much as a deterrent and as a threat to people, that if they put it one step out of line, that they will be dealt with like this. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, PTA, Online Security Safety Act, all of those things could be got rid of. This saying, putting it into committee and coming up with all sorts of alternatives and all of that is in effect just procrastination.
Dragging their feet.
Now, Geneva is coming up in September, and I think we need to get a resolution, a rollover on the existing resolution, where the government will be given 2 more years to come clean with regard to the pledges that they made to the people with regard to PTA, our Online Security Act, and the reform of the Aegis Office in particular. But when you look at the way that the government has operated, particularly with regard to the North and East, you take the land circular, the land thing. They
which was
withdrew
utterly
it,
ridiculous.
almost 6,000 acres. They withdrew it at the end of the day because someone went to court. It was a totally heartless, callous thing to have done.
Indefensible.
Indefensible, and so if that is the way laws are made, it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence.
And that particular that particular move to acquire lands was never in the manifesto.
Exactly. Exactly. And so likewise, they said that, they would get rid of the PTA, but that they would at least observe a moratorium with regard to it, which has not happened. So, so then, there is the other dimension that feeds the suspicion that the government really does not want to get rid of any of these things, that it finds them handy and convenient if things go pear-shaped and that they have to deal with dissent. These are handy tools to deal with dissent.
But now you mentioned Geneva, which is coming up, Dr. Sara. Every time we go to Geneva, we are on the defensive. We're like little children who've been brought into the principal's office. And it shouldn't be so. After all, many of the countries which are standing there accusing us are also terrible at human rights themselves. So they are in actually no position to be lecturing us. But we have this guilty complex, don't we? And we go there and we stand there and we say, no, we don't accept anything that you say. We'll have our homegrown solutions. But we've been saying this for the past 15 years.
No, so this is the thing. We are members of the international community, and therefore there will always be a certain degree of scrutiny from member states in the international community. But I think the key thing here is this, is that we've signed up to international obligations. We've recognized various rights that all citizens in the world have. We need to implement them. We do not have to worry about a Sri Lanka accountability project with regard to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights office if we started doing those investigations and having those cases. No one is saying that the entire Sri Lankan armed forces are guilty of war crimes. This is absurd. We have not done anything with regard to accountability for allegations of war crimes. The Chrysanthi Kumarasamy case stands out. Now, as a consequence of that, we have Germany. Let's see what will happen.
Yes, indeed. But coming back to Geneva, wouldn't it be nice if we went there on a high, our government delegation, and said, oh, we're here to announce that last week,
we got rid of this.
We got rid of PTA, we got rid of OSA, we're moving in this direction, that direction. By the way, what is it you guys have to say? Instead of going and, reading out something.
No, exactly. No, absolutely. That's what would be the most effective response to all of this, to go and sort of say, look, we've got rid of all of this, and therefore we no longer need to be on anyone's agenda with regard to human rights violations.
And what we need to say is, we did all this because we want to.
Exactly.
It's not that you guys...
Not because you pressured us into doing it, but the simple truth, of course, is this, is that it is because of them pressuring us that we respond.
So there's no sense of national pride in saying we are good enough, we're better than everyone. We deal with these things ourselves. We've dealt with it.
Yeah, on this particular issue, the sort of notion of national pride, I suppose, is those people who sort of believe that no way our war heroes are going to be turned into war criminals kind of argument.
But that's not national pride.
No, exactly.
Because after all, these crimes have taken place against our own people. Whether you take the 88-89, it was against people in the south, and then of course during the war it was against people in the north and east. So all over Sri Lanka, you will find mass graves all over Sri Lanka. The first one was Suryakanda. Where was that? Nowhere close to the northeast. Then you had, I think, Hokandara, you have Matale, and then of course you have the ones in the northeast as well.
Yeah, so this is the thing. I mean, if you take something like Germany, now what, 40 odd bodies?
I think we're up to close to, I think it was 55 or something.
Okay, whatever. Now, we have people who are screaming and shouting about Palestine and all of that, all very well and good. Is anyone doing it with regard to Germany?
This is troubling, isn't it?
So there is a hypocrisy there. No?
Yes.
That's hypocrisy. I mean, if you sort of go and ask anyone on the street with regard to Germany, they probably look at you with, without any sort of notion as to what are you talking about? When you say Palestine and Gaza, of course, they will know. So, I mean, we need to get our priorities right in terms of ask ourselves, what kind of Sri Lanka do we want, and what do we have to do to put ourselves meaningfully and seriously on that path of reconciliation? We have to face some hard truths.
But at the same time, Dr. Sara, it strikes me that the very fact that you and I are sitting here talking about this, it means we have come a long way. Because if, we remember Suryakanda and even Chemmani back in the 90s, journalists, when we wrote those stories, we wondered whether we would make it back home that night.
No, fair enough.
So
we have had yes, sure.
So it's a matter of now that we are able to discuss, we need everyone to be discussing this and talking about these matters and sorting it out without, hurling bricks at each other and or ignoring the whole
No, topic. So that is absolutely correct. That is why the new political culture that was ushered in by the Aragala, we need to capitalize on it. If we don't, then I think we're going to lose a once-in-a-lifetime chance as far as the country is concerned.
And also, you read a lot on social media that Chemmani is a litmus test, not just for the government, but for Sri Lankan society, because how we deal with Chemmani is going to reflect on
society as a whole.
Sri Lanka as a whole. So this is again something. It's a test, isn't it?
It is a test.
And we need to figure out how to pass this test.
Absolutely a test. Yeah, and hopefully we will get some marks, as it were, to pass that test. If we don't completely pass it, yeah.
But also, I mean, there's two sides to these mass graves. I mean, if you take Suryakanda, those bodies are still there. And it's not so much about prosecution. It is more about dealing with the fact that you have this mass grave in your backyard and going through the proper process and bringing closure to the families.
Exactly. Bringing closure to the families. And as I think I've said this before, even on the show, that people want an acknowledgement of the truth. They're not talking about going and punishing X and Y. They want that acknowledgement of the truth. And I think that's a basic right. It's about dignity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's something that people around the country deserve.
Exactly.
I mean, there was a big hue and cry about Batalanda after former President Ranil Wickremesinghe went and had a brouhaha on Al Jazeera. But that's just one case, isn't it? I mean, what about the Matale mass grave? 150 bodies were found there.
No, so this is the thing. I mean, a government has to prioritize this, provide the resources and get it over with, rather than let it sort of linger and fester like a sore, as it were. It needs to say, yes, we are going to now resolve this and we're going to act with regard to it. Yeah.
But does it trouble you that there isn't much discourse about this when there can be? Because, again, all credit to this government, despite their use of the PTA and OSA and all that, the ability for us to discuss this anywhere. I mean, you can discuss it on a street corner. And, whereas a few years ago, you discuss it on a street corner and the CID will visit your house.
Absolutely. But at the same time, not enough people know about it. And not enough people, therefore, also know the consequences of it. Those of us who know can say that, look, yes, it is going to be a reflection, and if nothing happens, it's an indictment on the country's conscience and all of that kind of thing. But there's a vast bulk of people who don't actually know about it. So that has to be addressed in terms of, and you all have a responsibility in terms of the media, but the politicians also. I mean, Germany, not a single Sri Lankan politician in terms of from the south has actually gone there, as far as I know. The High Commissioner went,
the UN High Commissioner
for Human Rights went, but not a single person has gone there. Now, I would have thought that that is a way of simple politics, of expressing solidarity with the mothers and all of that, and showing that you're concerned that, my God, these are all Sri Lankan citizens and they've just been buried in mass graves. And that's no way to treat them.
But wouldn't it, if you think of it cynically, it would also be a wonderful opportunity for a political party to capitalize and show that they're doing something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But what is this? Government is sort of too caught up in all the problems that it cannot cope with, that it can't just think of doing this, So, and indeed the opposition too.
Well, our opposition parties are woefully wanting as well.
Well, unfortunately, if this government is going to survive, if it is going to be found to be seriously wanting on the economy and all of that, it would be largely because the opposition has not got its act together, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's get back to the economic situation. Now we are awaiting President Donald Trump's verdict on our tariff. He mentioned a bunch of countries, and those tariffs range from 10% to 45%. So we really don't know. If we get a 10%, wonderful. If we get a 45%, we're in deep trouble. Is this something which we should be really concerned about? Would it destabilize the government, or would it strengthen the government?
I think it is something that we should be really concerned about, because with regard to trade, for instance, we need to reinforce, back up, augment the capacity, the caliber of those people who are dealing with trade policy. We need a proper trade policy, and therefore we need to get the capacity and the expertise that is relevant for that. Not just with regard to the US and Europe, but you take Indo-Sri Lanka trade. The FTA that we have needs to be, built up and advanced and all of that. But I understand that we don't really have the capacity to enter into those negotiations in a forceful and effective way. And we need to address that. On all fronts, as far as the economy is concerned, there is the kind of day-to-day and short-term firefighting. But we have to be very conscious of 27, 28, when the IMF the agreement comes to an end. Do we want to go back to another agreement? I don't think we do, because it's going to be probably a lot more restrictive as far as the economy is concerned. The conditionality is probably going to be graver and more serious. Or are we going to come up with a proper plan that will begin to take us out of this situation? We need something like $13 billion to begin to pay back?
Well, I think we need to decide our own national priorities,
exactly,
rather than be buffeted around
that's the point.
with the Donald Trumps of the world.
On all fronts, yes, we need national priorities. We need to ascertain as to where we would want to be in 5 years or 10 years' time as a country.
And how we are going to get there. It can't be that, 2048 we're going to be a developed country. You need to say, next year we'll be here, the year after we'll be here, and this is how we're going to get there. But again, we don't see this.
No, we don't. And this is where the government really has to ask itself, do we have the capacity, the capability to do this? Do we have to go outside of our supporters and reach out to those people who might have a better idea? And let's work together to do this, after all. It's our country.
I mean, it would be interesting to know who's on the team which goes out there and actually, talks to investors. What are we trying to do in order to get investment? What are our unique selling propositions, our USPs? How are we saying, come to Sri Lanka and don't go to Malaysia or whatever? We need that kind of planning.
Absolutely. And as far as I know, that's missing.
Yes, and in the past, of course, in previous governments, if you take the 60s, 70s, 80s, you had eloquent debaters whom that if, when they go off to Washington or London or wherever,
hold their own.
They could hold their own. I mean, Lakshman Kadiragama comes to mind. I mean, these are people who we were absolutely confident that no Westerner is going to be able to defeat him.
Or Easterner or Southerner or whoever. Yes. So this is that capacity question is something that the government needs to address. And, as I keep saying, communication.
Yes. And is the clock ticking, or is there a lot more time for the government?
Well, I think the clock is ticking. Every day that passes, they get burdened with with incumbency. And in any other situation, too, support would have seeped away from a government that is in office because they have to take responsibility for what they have and have not done. But it's more so if the feeling is, look, not a heck of a lot is happening. So in that respect, the government really needs to back up with regard to communication. It has to come up with regard to a plan of action, tell us what its priorities are. If they do that, I think, I don't think people are expecting them, as I said before, all of this to happen overnight. But we need to have a clear idea that we're on the right trajectory, on the right path.
And we need to see, what they're doing.
Exactly. Because, otherwise it becomes extremely opaque, and that is the grounds for a whole lot of conspiracy theories and all of that.
Absolutely. Well, I'm afraid we are out of time, Dr. Sara, and my thanks to you for appearing on the show again. Dr. Paikiasothy Saravanamuttu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives, CPA. And thank you to you at home for watching. Don't go away because the news is coming up next. As always, have a great evening.